Hi everyone, I'm Menendian here with Brian Weissman. We've just been having a 10-minute conversation about the reserve list. At the end of the last video, I asked a very important question, which is, if the Chris Ron Black Lotus was printed as a foil premium product in a Vintage Master set, how much would that affect the value of a mint BGS 10 Alpha Black Lotus?
Well, that's a pristine, okay.
Pristine, and the answer, Daniel, is?
0, zip.
It might actually increase the value.
It will actually increase the value because over time, there'll just be more collectors. Hold on, let me talk. Over time, there'll be more collectors and more investors who will play vintage over time, who eventually will make more money, who will want to buy the OG original first edition.
Another question for you, Daniel.
That's my professional opinion.
Brian made the I think, fatal assertion that the reprinting would actually lead to 0 Magic cards worth over $1 million. 20 years from now, if they were reprinting cards on the reserve list, would there be more or less $1 million+ cards?
There could only be more potentially.
Exactly.
That's my.
It would not reduce the number of Magic cards worth less than $1 million to 0.
But Brian's argument in the previous video was very different than what you just said, Stephen.
He did
right,
say
Brian?
That was
Brian. Brian, you said
I think
different.
that making monetary considerations for cards that are literally top 1 in the world is pointless anyway.
There it is.
Who cares?
But that's the purpose of the reserve list. The purpose of the reserve list is you
honestly,
acknowledge.
it's a lot more than that.
But that was the initial
I was
purpose.
playing the game actively as a
Me too.
professional when the reserve.
Not
You were not playing
not
professionally in the
professional.
game.
Yeah.
You were born in 1980, right? I'm not going to be ageist about this.
Yeah.
But you were like 13 or 14 years old.
But I did play in tournaments.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was a professional player literally when Chronicles was printed, and I remember
I own Power, by the way.
the blowback.
Yes.
Well, I know. I mean, in terms of the accessibility of Power at that point.
Everyone had
Trade
Power.
for it.
Everyone had
Right,
Power.
of course, because the pool of players was much smaller, and that's. If
I was
you
fully
had your own Power.
I was
to play
fully
Magic,
powered in 1994.
it was just called Magic anyway, right? It wasn't like Type 1 or anything. I think that making considerations for the absolute upper echelon of the secondary market is not a consideration that should enter into it anyway. To me, the reserve list represents a fundamental promise to players that we will preserve the legendary mystique. I mean, literally, they reprinted a bunch of legendary stuff in Chronicles, which is what pissed everybody off. We will make a promise going forward and say that there is a certain subsection of this game that we will enshrine forever in its legacy, and we will make a promise to players to never reprint this. And a promise matters. It matters both. It matters legally, it matters financially, and it matters in terms of company reputation. The company has a reputation to uphold. There's a particular standard that people make when they invest their hard-earned money that is in some cases aspirationally saved for months or even years at a time to acquire high-end stuff. What that says to the players who have done that, who have made the decision in their life to actually relegate some large percentage of their net worth or income into old cards, and saying to them, we don't care about your feelings, we don't care about your investment, we don't care about the faith that you've placed in us, we are just going to make this completely mercenary decision because that's exactly how it would be perceived by most of the people in the public. This is a cash grab, it's financial. Whenever companies do things like this, it doesn't even matter what their motivations are. People will view them through a negative lens, particularly after 25 years of precedent and promise that's suddenly being violated.
Let me make a couple of points.
Stephen, you got to answer that question.
Yeah, I will.
And you keep evading it, though.
No, I'm going to.
The promise area of
There's
the
about
company.
4 points I want to make.
Okay.
Let me make some points because Brian just spent a couple of minutes in monologue. Okay, so first of all, I think there's a misrepresentation of a number of facts in his monologue. The first is that the reserve list came into being in 1996. It hasn't been 25 years. It's actually been 23 years. Number two, the reserve list has been amended a number of times. So I think this notion, this assumption that like the reserve list comes into existence, he actually said this, that people have been investing for 25 years, I think it's completely false. It's a retrospective false narrative. What's actually happened is once the reserve list was reaffirmed, and then old school comes into being and prices begin to escalate, then collectors and speculators flood the old school market. I actually don't think that there is a single person, I'm not going to say a single person, but I think there are probably very, very few people in the world who, when the reserve list was implemented, said, I'm going to purchase a handful of cards based upon this promise and have continued to hold those cards without selling them, without rebuying them to this moment. The reserve list as a continuous promise has not been relied on in the way that Brian represented in any regard whatsoever. In fact, there were flutters. this is when I went to Wizards in around 2009. There was obviously a debate within Wizards, a long-running debate as to whether the reserve list should be abolished. So anyone who rely on that would have had to, first of all, likely know about that debate because it was very public, and very likely has relied on it only since the reaffirmation of the promise around 2009. So it's not been 25 years, it's been 12, or 10 or so at most. Now, so that's the first problem. The second problem is that, again, Brian talked about vintage being a dead format. It's actually a cart before the horse problem. What happened was, around 1995, 1996, there was a debate in Wizards about whether Type 1 should be supported. And they made a decision that they did not want to support the format. And it was a coinciding decision with the reserve list. What they actually did was they decided they were going to put all of their muscle behind Type 2. The schism of Type 1 and Type 2 wasn't about creating a new format. It was about putting these other cards into the past and putting their money into a more accessible format. And when they did that, they actually killed vintage. If Wizards had in 1995 decided we're going to put all of our money behind Type 1, we're going to reprint all the cards, we're going to put Pro Tour money, the biggest Pro Tour money behind Type 1, Type 1 could be way, way, way bigger today. It's not actually, vintage is not a dead format. It's played by hundreds of people every week on Magic Online. Why is it played on Magic Online? Hundreds.
You say hundreds?
Yeah, hundreds. Despite.
I'm sorry, hundreds is nothing.
Try to find it in a Magic. Try to go to a Magic store where people even have vintage cards.
Okay,
let me finish the point.
All right.
It's a dead format.
No, but the reason first of all, it's not defunct in the way it was in 2000.
Right.
In 2000, there was literally no one playing it except like casual. It's completely vibrant today. The problem is that Magic is like 100 times bigger than it was in 1999. And so as a percentage, but here's the problem.
Contemporary format.
Right.
Modern
But that's
and
because
standard and
where the support is put and where the support is.
Yeah,
There's a chicken and the egg quality.
Okay,
the
hold
point
on.
is this. The point. Let me summarize.
I gotta moderate this.
Where money goes,
Yeah.
where tournament prize goes,
Okay.
is where tournaments are played, and people will purchase cards to play in tournaments that exist.
Stop right there. Brian, you're going to have a turn to rebuttal that vintage is dead and that whole prize support. Hold on, that phenomenon. But Steven, hold on a second.
Okay, we have to
No,
go.
we're good. We're only 7 minutes in. But real quick question. Steven, you have to think about, after he says his part, I want you to answer his question actually.
Which is,
Are you kidding me? The entire thing about the promissory.
Yeah.
You didn't answer that. So hold
I
on.
did. I did
Tell me
answer
why vintage is dead and explain that reasoning.
that's too much of a side
I
conversation.
mean, it's anecdotal, of course, but I don't think that online tournaments that have an attendance in the hundreds, where
Hundreds.
all of that stuff has been reprinted and it's cost a
It's
few
pennies,
dollars.
yeah.
Right. It's certainly pennies on the dollar. I mean, the cards are a Black Lotus. I don't know what it's worth online, but it's
Let's just say 80.
yeah, a minuscule fraction what they cost in reality. Even with all of that accessibility, you have people only engaging in that format. I've tried to play vintage online. I've certainly tried to get old school games online. It's practically impossible. Vintage games are rare to find online. I mean, just online play in general, because people are being pushed towards Magic Arena anyway.
Yes.
Point being, it's not indicative of actually what's going on the ground. I've never been to a Magic store. I don't know how many card stores you've been to in
Quite
the
a
last
few,
decade
yeah.
or so. I've never been to a Magic store where they play really any formats besides modern, standard, and limited formats. Nobody is playing vintage. Nobody even owns those cards. You go into a store, if people look through your binder and they see actual real old school cards or vintage cards,
Let's go.
they're astonished. They get their friends. They take photographs.
Don't worry, we can still talk while we're on the way. Yeah, keep
We
going.
can't talk while we're walking.
I'll pause it. All right, guys, we'll be right back. We're going to walk to the train station. We'll talk more about this. This is a good
On
argument.
the train.
All right, guys, we're back with the train station. We're going to Bern, Swiss Alps. We're a little bit cold. Where were we on the debate? Basically,
Brian
vintage was
posed
dead?
the question,
Yes.
and he wants me to answer it directly and forcefully, that the reserve list is a promise and has both the effect of a promise as well as the legal and financial implications of the promise, right? So think about this. Daniel, if I said to you, I promise you I will never borrow $100 from you, right? Like I make a promise.
Yeah.
And yet like someday you want me to borrow money from you so that I can make you even more money, right? So the original purpose of the promise goes away because it serves some other greater end. What I'm saying is the promise existed, but it no longer serves the main function in which it was intended. And therefore that promise should have been abandoned. Now, as time goes on, it gets harder and harder to break that promise. They should have broken it when they were debating it years ago. Now that they have it, it gets harder and harder to maintain. Not because I don't think it's the ethically wrong thing to do. I still think the right thing to do for the game of Magic, and also for vintage and old school players, is to break it. I think the problem with the promise now is that the financial liability, the promissory estoppel problem, is so great that it would be enormous class
There
action.
would be incredible.
Class action.
There'd be
Yeah.
a ton of losses.
So is it possible to break the promise now?
Is it possible? Yes, you can break a promise.
Is it worth it?
Well, that's the thing, is when you break a promise,
course it's
you're
not.
liable. You can break a contract, right? I can write
I'm
a
asking
contract with
Steven.
you.
Steven, is it worth it to
Is
break
worth
it now?
I think it's the right thing to do.
It's still worth it,
It's
even the
ju-
financial.
It's the right thing to do for
Wow.
the game. Now, at this point, it might be one under the bridge. You know, as I was telling Brian earlier, eventually people will be able to print, besides Wizards, will be able to print Black Lotuses. And then it won't even matter. Because the copyright trademark will expire.
All right, Brian, your turn. Is it? You were shaking your head. It's not worth it, huh?
You may want to wait until the train passes.
Guys, by the way, Brian,
Brian,
Brian, Brian's anti-cold, so apparently he just
No, go ahead.
he's
Well, I think that the promise represents a great deal more than just. It's not just entirely a financial thing. I think that Stephen is making a mistake of looking at this entirely as a financial question, or at least mostly as a financial one. And I think that the goodwill established by the promise,
the goodwill.
and the faith that people have placed in that promise with regards to their relationship with the company, and
Come closer.
and more importantly, don't get hit by the train. Sorry.
This is our train.
And their relationship with the cards themselves, and the way that people feel about them emotionally because they are special things, cannot be understated. And I think, as I said before in the other video, I think that if you reprint them and you turn them into Thomas Kincaid prints rather than originals, you destroy something.
Kitschy bad art.
Yes, you destroy something permanent.
All right, hold on.
Especially
Stand right
about
here.
those
Take a
cards
picture.
forever.
Ready? We're gonna get there. 1, 2, 3.
I'll give my answer on the train.
Thomas, why do you keep? Why do you
keep
keep
talking
doing?
about Thomas
You're gonna ruin the value of all Thomas Kincaid prints. What are you doing?
There's a big overlap between
What are you doing?
your viewing demographic and
We're gonna get sued by your Thomas Kincaid comments.
So here's the
No,
problem.
no. Brian was continuing. Hold on,
Yeah,
Brian.
Is there a lounge somewhere with chairs?
This is the lounge.
With seats in it. I mean, like tables.
No, I think this is the most expensive.
We're not playing Camden.
We can't play that.
So here's the issue. Again, I think that Brian. Yeah, I know. I'm
Which one are we going to, by the way?
We're going to Alton, which is.
There's
about
not on the fucking list.
So far.
Oh, okay. 12:58. Okay, go ahead. Let's go
So
ahead.
the problem is that, again, and Brian continues to misstate this and repeat the error, which is that people aren't relying on this a 23-year-old promise. They're recently relying on it. It's not like the number of people who've relied on this promise as of 1996 to today is probably virtually zero. What's happened
It's
is
been
that
tacit reliance, just because it's not spoken. But that's what trust is. That's what trust in a
what I'm
company
saying,
is.
what I'm saying is
It's not
that
spoken. It's not something that people just declare all the
what
time.
I
You
mean
know,
is that there's probably no one who on March 1st, 1996, when this went into effect, purchased a card based on that promise
Doesn't
and is
matter.
holding that card today. What it
that's
is,
not the reason, though.
but if
You
a
can state
promise
that
has
over and over again, but
a
that's
promise
not the
has no
reason.
reliance, it's not a promise. The reliance is what makes a promise effective. Is that you're relying on the promise. If you say to me, I promise I'll never eat radishes.
Well, we're
right?
relying
If I
on
don't
the
rely on it-
goodwill and the faith of the company to keep their word, right? That's what you're claiming. That's what you're saying.
But what I'm saying, the promise only matters if there's reliance. If there's no reliance, then the promise has no effect.
So
Reliance is when people actually act upon the promise. What I'm saying is that yes, people today are acting on the
I'm
promise.
really confused with the word reliance here.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say something as an aside because Stephen is fond of these thought experiment ideas. Daniel, I'll pose this question to you.
Louder, please.
How many of the high-end buyers that you interact with on a regular basis, if you were to go to them yesterday or 5 years ago or 10 years ago and say, hey, you're planning on investing some large amount of your money in Magic as a thing, in
Old school
things that-
cards.
in old school cards and things that are driving the secondary market. If I were to tell you that Wizards has plans to violate their 24-year, 23, whatever
23.
time frame we're looking at, promise to the players to not reprint these things ever, how likely would you be to go and not only place your trust in the company, but also invest your money in these vehicles?
That's
these
two
investment
separate
vehicles?
questions. Ignore the first question because it's not about trust in the company. The company has no effect whatsoever on the
All right.
value of 1993
But it
cards.
is,
So answer
it's
the-
trusting in
the credibility of the reserve.
Okay,
list.
hold on. You're asking two questions. So what is
Yeah.
the first question?
Yeah, how if you were to go to your
The
buyers,
first question's
Hold
irrelevant.
on.
as a thought experiment, if you were to go to the people that are spending these high-end prices on old school cards and vintage cards,
Right.
and you were to tell them, hey, do you know that they're going to be, before you buy this Beta Black Lotus for 40,000 or whatever,
Right.
if I told you, and I think it's important that I make this disclosure
Right,
as a businessman, Wizards of the Coast is planning on reprinting this exact card
Right.
as a foil, whatever,
Alternative
a foil alternative art thing in a future set next year.
Yeah.
How likely do you think those people would be to go and invest the money in the high-end stuff and continue to drive the market upward as
Right.
you've been experiencing? If they know that all that shit is going to become completely commonplace and reprinted, that you're going to have
And
12-year-old
shitty
kids
alternative art.
All right.
running around with Moxes and Lotus and stuff.
All right. So I'm here on the train recording this. This is the answer to the question. You guys ready?
Yep.
Brian, if I was to tell high-end buyers before all this boom and all this shit, and I was being,
No, he asked the
upfront.
question today.
Yeah, question.
I'm saying like it's today. If you're,
Yeah.
But I'm saying if you're looking at a time
Okay.
frame of
He's talking
Fine.
today.
Okay. Fine.
5 years, 10 years,
Fine.
etc.
If you tell the customers today there would be an exodus of a certain amount of cards that would
That's
be
not what
sold
he asked.
instantly. Yes.
That's not what he
today,
asked.
right?
I'm
No,
asking
that's
about
not
how
what he asked.
reluctant would these people.
Very reluctant.
I think they would
What
be
scale?
incredibly
If the scale,
reluctant,
if the scale was 1 to 10, 10 is the highest, 1 is the
That's
least.
not what he's asking.
Then what are you asking?
He's asking if the vintage master set that I described earlier was printed.
Yes.
How reluctant would your high-end buyers be to buy your high-end alpha cards?
But this is it.
Oh,
None.
okay. Hold on.
None.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is an anticipate. But if you go back 5 years, see the market has moved. So
You
much.
asked two different questions.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that's not
He
fair.
did.
That's
Okay.
not fair.
Just answer that
Okay,
question.
hold on.
Answer the question
Okay.
I just asked first, though.
What is the exact? Okay, are you asking today or before?
I
He said today.
I gave you multiple
Okay,
time frames.
fine.
I said yesterday.
Yesterday?
5 years or 10 years.
The vintage master
Okay,
set
stop.
with
Okay,
shitty alternative.
hold on. If you I'll start with the 10 years ago. If you asked 10 years ago, I would say that the buyers would be very concerned. Did you put any new money in? 5 years ago, same idea. Today, because all the prices have gone up, I think there would be a hold, but I think there will be some sales. But I think eventually, longer term, there might be a dip, like 25%, but then eventually be bought back by collectors and investors because of pure nostalgia.
so a very complicated set of answers.
But 10 to 5 years ago, it would have been, the growth would be stagnant. It would be very
I
hard.
totally disagree.
Okay,
And
fine.
I'll explain.
Fair enough.
No, I'll explain more.
Well,
I'll explain.
Because you're a professional who's dealt in the secondary market of cards.
See, this is not
You're-
fair,
Look,
Stephen.
I-
You're
I have-
disagreeing on what basis?
No.
What do you?
First of all, let's not understate my involvement. No, I'm not a dealer, but I have observed them these prices as close as anyone. I've been basically in the ground floor on old school cards.
But you're not an investor. You're a player.
So, let me answer the question in several ways. Okay. First of all, he has two questions. He said, "How confident would the players be in the company?" Right. Look, promises are broken all the time.
Oh, hold on a second. We have to get a ticket.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Pause.
All right, we're back. We had to pay for our ticket or scan it. All right, we're back. Go ahead,
All right.
Stephen.
All right, so I'm going to make a couple of points, hopefully uninterrupted by either one of you. Okay, so first of all,
Speak a little louder.
let's deal with the question of the promise as a company reliance. Okay, so one of the questions that Brian asked is, to what extent would your clients, Daniel, how would they feel about the company, right? Look, promises are broken all the time. Remember when George Herbert Walker Bush said no new taxes, and then he raised taxes?
And then he lost the
He
election.
lost
Then he
it.
lost
He
the
didn't
election.
lose the election because of the new
Jesus.
taxes. He lost the election because of the economy.
Well,
okay?
he was beaten over the head by that.
Yes, but
endlessly.
But that would have been
mattered.
that would have been
Off
from the
topic,
right. That would have
off
been covered.
topic.
The point is that promises are broken all the time. The issue was not whether the promise was broken. The promise was broken for good reason. The issue is that the promise is completely disconnected from how people feel about the company today. Look, old school investors are not investing in Wizards of the Coast. They're not buying stock in Hasbro. They're buying cards that were printed 26 years ago, and they don't care about Wizards promises today. With the integrity of Wizards of the Coast, listen.
What on earth? That's
Hold on. Let me
cannot
finish.
You can't-
The
Oh my
integrity of
God.
Wizards of the Coast as a company has absolutely no bearing on the value of an Alpha Black Lotus.
Absolutely
has
untrue.
no bearing. Well, you can disagree with that, but let me make the case.
Comment below if you disagree or not.
Okay, listen.
Yeah.
Listen, because these are cards that were printed in 1993.
Yeah.
What does Wizards have to do with an Alpha Black Lotus today? Nothing. Do they acquire them and redistribute them? Do they reprint them?
They literally did that. They bought back a bunch of those cards and gave them out of respect.
None
They
were
also
Alpha
just,
Black Lotuses.
They just hosted
Those were Zendikars Hidden Treasures.
Zendikar Hidden Treasure.
One time in 2009.
Didn't they
That
just
was 10
host
years
a
ago.
beta sealed?
Beta
a
sealed,
beta
yes.
booster draft?
That's
There were
not
3 different ones
reacquiring
for
and
the
redistributing. Those were ones that were held in Hawk.
They had to buy them. They had to buy them to reacquire them.
Literally just
Those
did
are
exactly what you
packs.
said.
Those are packs. Those aren't individual.
It's called
cards.
Mythic Invitational. You have to buy them
Look,
back.
Look, this is a really simple point. Does anything Wizards of the Coast say and or do today
Fine.
matter
Fine.
to investors who are exclusively buying cards printed in 1993 or early 1994? No. It has absolutely. They could be doing anything they want. It's completely unrelated.
The
It's
main
old
point.
school.
The main point of reprinting the reserve list is to. Well, hold on a sec. To your
That was
point,
only my first
was to
point.
grow. Was to grow Magic, right?
No.
Was to grow what?
No. I'm repeating myself now, but I'm trying to answer the questions that came up in sequence. The point of the reserve list was to preserve the value of cards that were degraded and devalued through reprint. At the time, what happened was 4th edition and Chronicles in 4th edition, both of them in particular, included shocking new reprints that systematically devalued cards and legends in particular. And there was enormous fear that they would continue to do
Well,
reprint
Arabian
sets.
Nights too. Chronicles were printed or not
Yes.
Jin, whichever one. Which
Yes,
is one of the most
it was
valuable cards
Arabian
in
Nights, Antiquities, but Legends mainly and secondarily Arabian.
Look at that, guys. Beautiful Switzerland.
It is beautiful. So I want to go through the questions that were asked. The first is, does the trust or integrity of the company actually matter to? Look, and you're talking to an old school investor. You know what matters to an old school investor? The grading of the card, the centering of the card, the condition of the card. That's what matters to them. What matters to them is you're looking skeptical.
You're talking about the high end only.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Can I say something?
How about the guys with 29 Arabian Nights sets? Do
can
they
I-
care about that?
Do you think that a guy who specifically comes to you and says, I want to buy an Arabian Nights set, do you think anything Wizards of the Coast does or does not do matters to the evaluation of whether to purchase that set?
Yeah.
No.
Hold on. I have a
No.
point. No. I know. Just let me
May
talk.
I say
Stop.
something?
Look,
Alright,
there
go
is
ahead.
Hold on.
No.
Hold on. Let me answer the question. In Magic now, there's whale collectors. There's people that are, kind of more high-end collectors. Then there's kind of the mid-tier and the lower tier. To answer your question, whale collectors could give fucking no point about the
That's my
high grade.
point.
No, hold on. That's one.
That's my point.
Hold on. High-end collectors.
We're talking
Hey,
about
hold on.
high-end. That was what
Are you
Brian
talking about
was
high-end or
talking-
mid-level? 'Cause-
Brian was specifically talking about high-end. I'm talking in that context.
I actually specifically said your customer base.
Okay, fine. So to
That's a lot of
the high-end point collectors, it's gotten to the point where actual customers have said to me, they don't give a rat's ass if Wizards Point prints another Black Lotus 1,000 times.
Thank you.
Because at this point, they're iconic, historical, nostalgic
The alpha
collectibles.
card is, yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's alpha, beta, or
Yeah,
limited.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
All right, Brian, do you have a rebuttal to that one?
I only got through my first point. He
Okay,
got to
go-
like 3
okay,
points.
go ahead.
All right.
Well,
so the first.
I don't want to be a stickler. We don't have a timer. It's not a formal debate. But in terms of the amount of time that
Yeah, we have unlimited time
presenting
here.
your ideas versus what I've
Okay,
said,
go ahead.
counterpoint, it's disproportionate.
The video can run as long as it wants.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I disagree. I agree it's disproportionate, but I've had less time. So anyway, so the first question was about the promise.
That's not true, guys. Play back the video.
We can actually we can. Someone should go ahead and see exactly how much time I've taken. No, I'm just kidding. Listen. Here's the question. The question is about, to what extent does what Wizards say matter to old school collectors? And I'll broaden it to say mid-level, whatever. I think that frankly for old school players, particularly old school
Wait,
players,
high end or low? What are you talking about?
saying-
You're talking about different things now.
old school players.
Okay,
People
fine.
who
Old school
play-
players, fine.
Old school players. They actually just ignore, many old school players just ignore recent Magic. Like what they do, what Wizards does is essentially off their radar to many old school players.
Because of the reserve list.
No, not because the
Because
reserve.
their collections are sacrosanct, and that matters.
Look, here's the thing.
That's why they don't care.
The reserve list, first of all, old school players, they like old school frame. The new school, like to put a card on a new art, like Swedish doesn't even allow, even Eternal Central, I think requires it to be original art. So if Wizards of the Coast, here's one of the biggest errors that people make, Daniel, and I have yet to address this point. This might be the single most important, nuanced point that we have not yet mentioned. Breaking of the reserve list does not mean reprinting old cards. I'm going to say it again. Breaking of the reserve list does not mean reprinting old cards. That's an important point because we've been talking as if breaking the reserve list automatically equates to the reprint of new cards. In my thought experiment, what I said was, suppose Wizards had broken the reserve list in 2010 and then reprinted cards in 2018. You see what that 8-year window does? Is it creates an experience, a background context in which collectors have had time to evaluate the effects of the reserve list. It just becomes part of the background things, the experience of the format. So it's not like breaking the reserve list is, hey, we're reprinting, not only are we reprinting Black Lotus, but we're going back to Carta Mundi and we're asking them to reprint Black Lotus so it looks exactly like Alpha Black Lotus. That's a totally different thing. Totally different thing. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is fundamentally the purpose of the reserve list, which to preserve the value of old school cards, no longer serves that function. If it were abolished 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, yesterday.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. He says it doesn't serve the purpose.
Why?
How much do old school cards cost now?
Yes, and you're
Right?
assuming that's because of the reserve.
No, let him
those
talk. Let him talk.
cards, those cards have the value they have in a universe where the reserve list exists in 2019, and the company
that's a good
has
point.
adhered
That's a
to
good point.
its
I have a
promise
rebuttal to
for
that.
that entire span.
They
of
only
time.
exist because they only
I
exist
think
because
that's-
of the reserve
I think
list.
that Stephen is making a huge quantity of very broad sweeping assumptions about
There's a lot of assumptions in this
the
one.
behavior of high-end collectors, of which he is not one, and also of
It's not offensive.
the
comment.
way, and it's not meant to be offensive, and also just the way that the universe looks if Wizards goes in 2009 when they were apparently considering it and does a reprint, and not necessarily. You're right. There is a very valid point that you've made as far as violation of the reserve list. Well, there's lots of cards on the
reprinting.
reserve list that would not affect the secondary market at all, right?
Like
There's-
collector's edition
Like,
sets,
there's a
international edition sets, only
Yeah.
valuable because of the fact the reserve list exists.
No,
Yes,
no, they're valuable.
Are you
because
kidding me?
They're valuable because there's only 5,000 collector's editions and 10,000
International. No, switch
Yeah,
that.
that's
Yeah.
why they're valuable.
No, it's not.
It doesn't matter about how many.
I was
It-
in the, I was, I
are
was
you
in the middle of
kidding?
making a point.
Okay.
Again, I think that it's speculative and it's hard to really say. I would say that the reason why collector's editions have gone up in value is because the reserve list prevents those cards
Thank
from
you.
being
Thank you.
accessible
That's the
to
that's the
people
main
who
reason
wanna
why.
play old school format, and they want to own a
Hold
part
on.
of.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
I'm being dead honest with you.
Yeah.
If cards like Storm World, Field of Dreams, Shahrazad were reprinted in a different art, you're telling me that those cards wouldn't go down dramatically.
Of course they.
But hold on, no. I want Stephen to answer this question. Are you telling me the old frame, Arabian Nights? Be dead honest with me. I'm talking about those kind of cards, not talking about Black Lotus. Those kind of cards.
I will answer the question, but I only if I can explain and elaborate.
Fine, go ahead, go.
All right. So here, this is.
Jesus.
All right, I'm gonna set my stopwatch here.
We're getting a. I mean, let Brian make his full points if he'd like.
No,
but
that's the point.
okay.
Answer the question.
Yeah. So this is where it gets really complicated because we're talking about different kinds of cards. So we're talking about alpha cards, beta cards, unlimited cards, collector's edition cards, revised cards, Arabian Nights, Legends, to all kinds of cards, right? As a basic fundamental principle of economics as well as magic, that when you reprint a card, you increase the supply, and therefore the equilibrium of supply and demand means the card value goes down. That's a fundamental reality. But there's another fundamental reality. And the fundamental reality is that old school players, old school magic, only permits original cards. You cannot play old school with a new Black Lotus. You cannot.
What does that have to do with the value
What
of
it
the cards?
has to do with is that most of the value of the old school cards, most of the value
Here's the
is a
point.
direct function of old school magic.
I totally disagree.
This is the part that disagree. Yeah, this is big
I
time.
totally disagree.
Yeah.
I think that has certainly revived interest in ownership
Yes.
of those cards from a playing perspective. But I don't think that the secondary market and the massive inflation of prices that you see in those old school cards has anything to do with old school, because the old school population is a tiny, tiny sliver. Not just that, but most of the high-end cards are being walled off.
Do not say
away
anything
from the
yet,
population.
Stephen.
I'm not.
Stephen, don't say anything.
I'm not.
Brian, I have to agree with Brian on this point for this reason. I have plenty of collectors and investors who don't play old school anymore that just hoard the crap
That's
out of
true.
the cards for
That's true.
investment.
That's
So
true.
Brian is exactly right
Brian
for that one.
Brian, you're both right that there is a large number of collectors who don't play old school, but you're wrong that old school isn't what's driving it. Let me explain.
Okay,
If old
I
school-
have another point
no.
to make still.
Okay,
Well,
go-
we're
okay,
on this. We're on
No,
this.
no.
Let's
Let him
follow
make
the tangent.
No,
so you can make a larger point.
no. Finish the point. Finish
Yeah,
that point.
The point is that
No, finish
if
the
old
point.
School, if old school had never been, if old school had never blown up, let's rewind.
Stop
The,
watching. Where's it at?
rewind the universe 5 years.
Yeah.
Just rewind the
Okay,
universe
real 5 years. All right.
There's no old school.
Okay.
No old school players, no old school communities, no one playing old school. Collectors aren't chasing this to the degree they are now. What's happened is the demand for the cards has created a context in which the prices have escalated. The supply is so small and the demand is so great that every additional person chasing an old school card creates a massive increase in demand where the equilibria is. And so the problem is that that's actually created a massive incentive for collectors to flood back in. Look at the price of Jusum Gin from 1996 to 2005. It stayed completely stable at $150. Why is it now $1,500? Is it you're just saying that all of a sudden collectors have come in? No, collectors have come in, but part of the reason collectors have come in is because these old school communities have popped up.
How many people play Jusum Gin and
How many people play old school?
All it takes is more people. All it takes is a handful.
I imagine the population base is less than 10,000 across the whole.
I completely agree with you, but that's all it takes because the number of cards is so small. You have a fixed supply of cards. The supply curve is completely fixed. Which means every tiny increase.
You're claiming that the Swedish people, the Swedish groups, only
worldwide.
No. Eternal Central allows 4th edition.
But they don't allow alternative art. You have to use original
How
art.
do you know that? Let's say the world changed.
Look it up.
Let's say no. Let's say you reprinted the cards.
Yes.
I bet
under new art.
Under new art, I bet you they would allow it.
Of course they would.
See, and then the prices. The people are doing the old school.
The curators of those formats.
No.
You don't think they
I know
would?
them.
Look, absolutely not.
But there's a million splinter factions. There's nothing to stop other pockets of people from showing up and saying, "Hey,
make another
we
group."
think that this
Right.
rule is stupid.
All right.
We now have all of our monsters and lotuses.
You
we
guys
want to
may
be able to
be
play with
in
them.
on the high end, but you don't know what the old school community is doing.
But how does that affect the values, though? Because the thing is, what Brian and I are saying is that what you're missing out is that there's much more. Okay, what I'm saying is this, Brian.
What is the point
hold on a sec. The net worth and the value, the collectors that are investing in this, would you say that they're probably worth over $1 million+ easily,
What are you talking
right?
about?
Like they spend a lot of money, like investors into old school and older Magic, right? Hold on a sec. In old school players, what you're claiming is that what we're claiming.
The investors are generally tend to be high net worth individuals.
That's my
Not
point.
necessarily.
What I'm trying to say is that the investors are also driving the value too.
Yes.
By a
but
significant
you're missing
amount.
What I'm saying.
But they're going to sell out. They're going to if you reprinted the damn cards, those cards would go down.
Think about it in terms of necessary and sufficient condition, right? The existence of old school communities is a necessary condition to create the environment in which investors are coming in and making and doing massive purchases. What I'm saying is, if this old school communities did not exist, you wouldn't have players hoarding up 25 sets of Arabian Nights. You just wouldn't.
That is not true at all.
Completely
That
do
is
not agree with
completely not true.
Right, may I make a point I haven't been able to
Yeah.
talk at all?
Stop talking for a second. There. Let's let Brian talk.
Okay, I'm sure you experienced this yourself as a dealer of high-end stuff, but the price increases between
Are not
the
because
beginning
of
of 2017 up to 2018 were gigantic. Daniel, how much would you say in terms of percentages the
Massive.
market grew in that 1 year, 2017 to 2018?
4 to 5 times.
4 to 5 times.
The size of the market
And
or the
20
value?
Values.
And
easily.
2016 to 2017, a very, very
Yeah.
stratospheric amount of growth.
Yeah.
I remember I was investing in revised dual lands that whole time, all the way through 2016,
Right.
all the way through 2017. The prices were going up gigantically
Right.
in that period of time. There is a theory that I certainly subscribe to that makes a great deal of sense, that there was a direct correlation between the rise in the global cryptocurrency market and the rise of Magic card prices. They seem to be very, very closely correlated, that as the crypto market was skyrocketing all the way across 2016, so too was the secondary market for high-end Magic the Gathering cards. And in the aftermath of the crypto boom, when the prices plateaued, I guess that was at the beginning, actually I'm thinking of 2017, because the prices plateaued at the beginning, right around the beginning of 2018, at the very tail end of 2017. So the crypto market exploded 10x or even bigger in that span. People that were making more money than they had ever seen in their lifetimes during the run-up in 2017 suddenly had huge, gargantuan amounts of cash that they had not had to work to acquire. It was basically just thrown in their face. And they were looking for vehicles that seemed more stable to invest in, things that they knew. And if you look at the demographic overlap between people who were investing in the crypto space versus people who were making a lot of money in the crypto space versus people who were investing in high-end Magic cards, I imagine there was a tremendously large overlap. I mean, I personally know some of the people who were some of the biggest owners of cryptocurrency were people who were my colleagues.
As a dealer of cards,
that can be true. It doesn't
no, it's not can be true. As a dealer, hold on. As a dealer,
two of the biggest people in crypto space are people that I knew and was friends with back in the mid 1990s, who were both big Magic players. It doesn't strain credulity to think that their peers also play Magic and certainly understand and are aware of it. So there was a huge amount of this, not ill-gotten, but very easily accessible crypto money
Lots of
being
capital.
capital being generated and poured into the Magic space.
And the number one thing cryptocurrency investors said was I poured into reserveless cards.
That has absolutely nothing to do with old school.
Nothing to do with the game.
I would say that this is a causation versus correlation thing, and I think that old school was seeing a big resurgence in interest in that same period of time, because suddenly people were finding out, oh my God, these old school cards are going up in value tremendously. They're being driven by the crypto secondary market.
It's not,
and all the money being poured into the environment from there. Wow, there's a revived interest in this. Suddenly, I'm going to go and dust off my old collection and take a look at it again. Oh my God, my Black Lotus is now worth $15,000. Last time I checked, this was only worth $1,000. My collection means something. I'm going to go gather up my cards and start playing again. I mean, this is a small singular case, but I know a guy in Washington that I play with that was a Magic player back in 1994, 1995, and he actually learned through an article about the secondary market, about cards that were selling on eBay. Almost certainly these are high-end cards, the kind of stuff that Daniel deals with. Cards that were selling for these absolutely amazing, unprecedented prices. And he went, holy shit, I own some of these cards. I got to go back and look at my collection. That got him interested in the format, and he started playing old school because of that. He started playing old school because of the prices. The prices weren't going up because he was playing old school. And I think it's very easy to make a causational argument that's specious, honestly, because I think that the crypto market driving the prices is actually what's driving old school enthusiasm.
Okay.
So you're discounting the fact that...
No, I'm not discounting. Go finish the point, and
I think that you're ascribing far too much credence to the old school players driving price. I think that the old school players, many of them actually just already own the cards in the first place. They're not buying new cards to add to their collections unless they're people
Good point. Thank you very much. That was a good point. Hold on. Next video. All right, guys. Watch part 2 or 3, whatever the hell this goes.
Part 3.
Thanks for watching. We're going to the Swiss Alps. Enjoy all the NOOBCON videos. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Are you...